Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Centurion Mark 5-1. As you can probably tell, this is the relatively new 72nd scale kit from Vespid Models, and I've got the Deluxe edition. What makes it Deluxe, Herbert, you might ask? This is a 3D printed canvas mantlet cover that replaces the non-canvas covered mantlet in the standard kit. I think it looks pretty good. It will require a little bit of plastic surgery before it goes on though. More about that when it comes time to put it on. The rest of the parts come on regular injection molded plastic sprues. I've not built that many Vespid kits yet, mostly because they're still relatively new and don't have all that many kits out yet, but I have come to expect fairly high quality from Vespid, and pretty much all of these sprues meet that expectation. This first one with the wheels and suspension parts did have one issue, and that is the broken thin bars on this suspension unit. I don't know if that's how the part came, or if I happened to break it getting the sprue out of the box. I'm pretty sure it came that way, though while it is a bit annoying, it didn't turn out to be too much of a problem. You can see how neat and crisp the parts are with your own eyes, but I'm still going to tell you that they are that. You can also see there's a few rounds of ammo on this sprue, if you want them, and the return rollers and tiny machine gun barrels are slide molded. Very nice. The bottoms of the jerry cans are also slide molded for whatever reason. It probably just helps make them as good looking single parts, which is what they are. I don't really have anything especially insightful to say about each of these sprues, and really, I think they speak for themselves.
If you can hear them speaking, you should probably see a doctor, Herbert.
Yes. Very funny. Ha ha ha. This sprue shows more of the very tiny fiddly parts, and some of the optional parts. They look good and won't require a lot of cleanup, but things like, say, the shovel, will require a gentle hand, both while clipping them from the sprue and doing any cleanup. These pictures don't really offer anything to compare the parts with size-wise, but this is a 72nd scale model, which is, I think, fairly accurately scaled, so things like shovels are going to be very thin. This sprue here has more bits.
Oh, really?
The important parts to note in my mind are the incredibly thin parts for the stowage basket for the turret. You should probably be at least a little bit careful with these. One of mine was broken, though you can't really see it on the sprue. It is entirely possible that I broke it while handling it. That particular assembly is very fiddly by itself, and broken parts will not make that any better. Tracks. These are, as I assume you can see, very nice, well-detailed link and length tracks. I did have a very small amount of difficulty with some of them, though that could have been and probably was my own fault, and not a problem with the kit itself. What matters is the tracks look really good. The whole bottom here is quite simple, and there's appropriate detail and good mountings for various bits of running gear. What more could you want? The upper turret part is really good looking and largely complete. Don't worry, you will still need to add a lot of parts to it, if adding a lot of parts is your thing. And if you're buying a Vespid kit, it probably is. This sprue has the plastic gun, which has been slide molded. It's a nice, perfectly usable gun, though I don't know why you would choose this over the metal gun barrel, which I'm assuming is the default in this kit. The only thing I saw being mentioned as part of the Deluxe kit is that 3D printed mantlet. There are two clear plastic parts for the searchlight, one of which is to be used with a plastic ring part, and the other is for use with a photo etch part, which you'll find somewhere on this fret. You'll probably hear me complaining a lot about the photo etch in this build, though in fairness, some of it is quite simple and easy to put on, and some of it is impossibly tiny. The kit includes this decal sheet, and the all-important Pussy Eater marking is here, as well as a bunch of other markings. At this point I have no real idea of the quality of Vespid's decals, but I'm sure they're perfectly fine, and they do look good. Here's the gun, the metal one, obviously. Not only does it look really good, but you also don't have to remove any mold lines from it. I'd expect this is the part most of us will be using. I will be. I'm sure the bits box will appreciate the plastic gun though. And here are the towing cables. I appreciate that these are metal and actually look convincingly like cables. That's really cool. How much trouble did old Herbert have installing these? Well, you'll have to stick around and find out. The instruction booklet, as seen here, is quite good. The diagrams are well laid out and easy enough to understand. The individual diagrams don't have too much going on in any one step, which, at least for me, reduces the chance of missing parts. I did skip back and forth through the instructions a little bit, which I suppose reintroduces the chance of missing things, but I just felt it made sense in a few cases to deviate from when the instructions say things should be done, particularly when it came to small bits of photo etch with a high chance of being damaged or knocked off the model and lost. Anyway, that's what's in the box. Let's glue some bits of plastic together. I start with the lower hull. I glue the lower front plate into place, and the fit here is amazing. I was very pleased with this. Then, onto that, I attached the little wheel holdy doovers for the idler wheels, and this part goes on easy with a really good fit. Now for some wheels. I add this small one here, just behind where the idler wheel will go. It plops right into place, though do make sure it's straight. You may have to nudge it a bit. And then the return rollers, which go into the 4 fairly obvious mounting points on either side. The fit is pretty good here too, but you may find you need to give them a bit of a nudge so they all line up nice and straight. I rather appreciate how the slide molding allows these to be a single part, yet still be really well detailed. The final drive assembly goes together next, and this is pretty simple. There are 3 parts that need to be glued together, and they're all shaped such that they should pretty much just plop right together without too much effort. Just be sure that you're using the correct parts and you probably won't have any problems. Suspension assemblies come next, and these are also pretty simple. I glue the springy part onto the back of the front part, making sure the axles for the road wheels are facing the right way. Then I glue the back part on. We need 2 bogies like this one, and another 4 like this one. Assembly is pretty much exactly the same, the only difference being the springy part in the middle has some thin, easily broken rods. One of mine did come with broken rods, as we saw before, but I still managed to get it together properly. You just have to be careful, that's all. I then attached the final drive assemblies to the hull. Nothing too tricky here, just be sure that you're putting them on the correct side. I followed that with another small wheel. I assume this one is to prevent the tracks from getting shoved under the rearmost return roller and causing a big mess. It is now drive sprocket time. These should drop together nice and easily, and they kind of did. Unfortunately though, the teeth didn't line up properly. It is a bit hard to see in the video, but they are out of alignment. I can't be sure if I mistakenly put the wrong parts together, or if this was an actual problem with the kit. I made some alterations with my knife, and then glued them back together so the teeth line up and engage with the tracks properly. I put the idler wheels together next, and this is simple enough. There's a choice between 2 different idler wheels here. I'm not really sure what the differences are, or how much they matter. One choice has an additional cap that goes on the outer side of the wheel, and that's the one I chose. Attaching the bogie assemblies to the hull seemed like a pretty reasonable next step, so that's what I did. The bogies without the thin little arms go in the centre, while the other bogies, obviously, go on the front and rear. I then tried to put on the idler wheels, though they didn't quite fit onto the axle-y parts. So I enlarged the holes with my knife. It wasn't anything difficult, though it was a bit annoying and kind of unexpected. There were a few little things like this throughout the build. Not real problems, nor difficult to deal with, but very slightly annoying. Anyway, I add the road wheels next. Just look at them all.
It's not that many.
These are quite simple to glue together, and it's probably quite difficult to put the wrong parts together, but do try to avoid that anyway. Once these wheels are together, it would be silly not to glue them onto the suspension units. They fit nicely onto their axles, though there is a small amount of play in the fit, so you may need to do a bit of nudging to get things lined up, but nothing too dramatic. Let's put some tracks on. I start by gluing one of the curved 2 link pieces into the drive sprocket, followed by the section that runs down to the road wheels. I then add the 2 other curved 2 link sections, and after making sure all of the parts are sitting properly, I set it aside to bond. I then glue the bottom ground contacting run of tracks to the shorter segment that will run up to the idler wheel. I make sure it's close to the right shape and let that bond as well. I then attach the drive sprocket assembly in the appropriate location, but I don't glue the sprocket on just yet. That's because while I'm attaching the lower run of track, I'll need to move the sprocket slightly to get the best positioning. Then, 3 more curved 2 link sections can be placed at the front, around the idler wheel. The upper run of tracks is made of 2 pieces, one long and one short. I got the long one into place easily enough. The way the tracks sag should help you get them sitting in the right place atop the return rollers. When I tried to add the second shorter section, I discovered that somehow I had too much track, which I assume means that somewhere along the way I've made a mistake. The way I fixed it was to simply cut off a link of track, and then the last section of track goes into place. Not perfectly, of course, but close enough for me. But it is still kind of annoying, and it did only happen on this side. Fortunately, it's not overly noticeable, and should be even less noticeable when the model is completed. This is the perfect candidate for hiding things with mud. These side parts will also help hide my crimes. Before they can be put onto the model, we need to add these little angled end bits that go at the rear. There's a very small tab to guide the fit here, though you wouldn't say that it locks the parts together, so you'll have to be careful to line them up properly. While they bond, I glue the rear plate into place. Like the lower front plate, this part fits amazingly well. Above that, I add this thing. It does seem to have a particular way that it should be installed. In the instructions it was a bit hard to see, but I think I got it around the right way. Then, why not install those track guards? There's a couple of tabs that slot into slots on the sides of the hull for these, which makes them pretty easy to place. You may just have to nudge them a bit so they're not resting on the tracks. Here's the plate that goes over the driver's compartment. We'll need to drill some holes in this to mount some spare track links later on, and fortunately, there are guides that show you where to drill here so you don't have to guess. And now, the first piece of photo etch. This one isn't too bad. It's just a flat piece that goes on the upper hull part like so. I did get this part slightly out of place and off to one side by probably 0.5 mm because superglue bonds really quickly when you don't want it to. I don't think it's a huge deal though, you'll barely see this when the turret is in place. Now that we've got that on, I might as well glue this engine deck and turret ring part into place. It more or less just plops right into position, though a little pressure won't hurt it. I follow that with the plate into which I just drilled those holes. It fits very well indeed. I then attach this little duva to the engine deck. There are obvious guide tabs for it, but you may need to eyeball it to make sure it sits vertically. Do make sure that you put it around the right way as well. Can't have your whatever this is being backwards now, can we? Then the upper front plate part goes into place, and there are 2 of these to choose from. As best I can tell, the main difference is the mud guards. One has guards that have been cut down and rounded on the outer edges. The other is the one that I've used, which has sharper edges, which is probably less than ideal for fighting in the jungle. The part does go into place easily, though you may have to kajigger the side guards a bit to get them lined up with the forward part. At the rear left, I add the travel lock for the main gun, which mounts onto a little nubbin. Next, I assemble the stowage bins for the sides of the hull. There's a choice of 2 parts for the outer side parts of these. I'm obviously not sure of the importance of those differences, but I believe the ones I've used are the early version, and they go into place nice and easily. Installing the stowage bins onto the hull is also pretty easy. The curved cutout that accommodates the turret ring makes it super easy to get the right position. I decided to follow that with the exhaust pipe and muffler parts, and they're not difficult to put on. It would be a little bit easier to add the photo etch bracing before putting these on though, and the instructions do suggest this, but I was avoiding photo etch at the time. It isn't too much of an issue really, and the exhausts do look really good. Then, I attach the vision devices to both halves of the driver's hatch. If you want to model your hatches open, there is an internal half of the vision device you could add, but I've obviously not done that. There are also some small photo etch guards that go on here too, but I figured it would be a bit easier to put those on once the hatches are in place. Installing the hatch parts is simple enough. The right one, from the driver's perspective, overlaps the left one. Putting the left one on first will make things easier. I make sure the hatches are firmly closed, and it's done. And now, why not install those little photo etch guards I mentioned? They did need to have a gentle curve bent into them, which I didn't video, but I used the handle of my knife to roll a bend into them. They're a bit fiddly to get into place because of their size, but they are in place, so victory for Herbert, I guess. The trick is now to not bump them and send them flying while handling the model for the rest of the build. The bracket for the front shackles goes on next, then I add shackles. These are very tiny and would be very easy to break. They will stay on with friction, at least for now. I follow that with this upper hook thing part, and this one won't stay on with friction, so glue will be needed. The glue can be added to the shackles at the same time. How convenient. Now, why not add some more photo etch? The braces for the track guards. They took a bit more kajiggering to get into place than they would have if the exhausts weren't already there, getting in the way, but I did get them on. I did also keep knocking them off and having to reattach them. The right rear one has been bent a little bit, but we can just call that battle damage, right? Covers for the exhausts go on next, and there's keying on top of the mufflers to help you get these in the correct position. Very helpful. On the left side I add this thing, which I'm pretty sure are handles for the pickaxes, the heads of which you can see on the edge of the guard there. At the front I add the spare track links. These are two different parts, so be sure you're putting them in the correct positions. On the rear of the hull I add the shackle bracket thing, and then the shackle parts. This is more or less the same as the ones on the front, just a different bracket part. Between those brackets, I add these two mountings, I guess you might call them. These will hold this thing, which is a leaf spring looking mounting for the towing hitch. It's not especially hard to put these parts on, and it's made even easier with tweezers. If you're looking for some nice tweezers, check the link to 9 Steps Industries in the link and use code Herbert20 for 20% off. Next, I assemble the external fuel tank. I glue the main body of that to the front part that will go against the hull, and that's nice and easy. Then I drilled out the lifting rings on the fuel tank top part. I wasn't really happy with this, partly because I didn't do a great job of drilling, but also it just sort of looks not quite right. I should have left it undrilled. Oh well, it doesn't look too bad from a distance. There is also a little nubbin on the hatch here you can shave off and replace with a photo etch handle, which I didn't do. That part can then be glued onto the top of the fuel tank. I had to apply a bit of pressure here, but it does go together well enough. Onto the back of the fuel tank, I glue the inner half of the towing cable holder, and obviously the outer part comes when you add the towing cables. Before we can attach the fuel tank to the hull, we do need the rear of the hull to actually be in place. It is a pretty nice fit, though a little bit of pressure was needed. The air deflector thing goes on next. It might have been slightly easier to install this before the plate I just added, but this wasn't difficult at all. The towing hitch comes next, and this is comprised of two parts. The hook bit that I'm adding here, and then this part with two little dangly bits. It's a bit fiddly because it's small, but eventually I got it into place. I then attach the fuel tank like so. My hope is the overhang of the fuel tank will protect the fiddly little towing hook from being knocked. Next, I add these engine deck surrounding things. Obviously I don't know what they're called, but they're not too hard to place. Spare road wheels go on next, and these are mounted on the front plate like so. This is something that, in my opinion, makes an Australian Centurion look like an Australian Centurion. On the right side here, I add more tools. Specifically a hammer, which the instructions tell us should go on at an angle like this. If there was meant to be anything to guide this part, I couldn't find it. Over the top of the hammer goes a shovel, and there wasn't really much of anything to guide this either. Here's another piece of photo etch. This one wasn't too bad to bend, and it was only a little bit annoying to try and get into the right position. I think I succeeded though. I then add the photo etch bracings for the front mudguards. There's no bending needed here, so these aren't too bad, though you might have to do a bit of kajiggering to get these in next to the spare road wheels. On the engine deck, we have a very nice collection of jerry cans. These are all individual jerry cans, so you could put them on as you like really, or completely omit them. I didn't show myself putting them in place, but you can see that they're there, so I must have done that, and to make sure they stay there, I add glue. Jerry good. Get it? Instead of very, I said Jerry. Ha ha ha! Now for some more photo etch. This bit with the little handle goes on this plastic box. The bends here are pretty easy to bend because there's bending lines etched into the part. I then add this, I don't know, handle at the other end. This was surprisingly fiddly, and I had trouble getting it to sit flat in the right place, but I got there in the end, or somewhere close enough. This is, I believe, an infantry phone, you know, for when they need to call a friend in a tank, which I assume is a good friend to have when you're infantry. This gets installed on the 4 nubbins on the left side of the fuel tank, and I did have to slice a bit of plastic off the back of this to get it to fit properly. You can't really tell if you look at it though, so that's nice. And I think that's enough hull for now, because oh, would you look at the time, it's turret time. I start by putting the 3D printed mantlet on. As you can probably see, it doesn't just drop right into place. It would have been really nice if it did, but it doesn't. so we've got to do some plastic surgery. I clip off the lower parts of the turret front, and then I sand it down. You don't need to remove too much material here, just enough that the mounting doodadery that would hold the canvas in place is gone. It's not exactly difficult surgery. I superglue the new mantlet on, and, well, while I did my best, it's not a perfect fit, and I will have to do a bit of putty work before painting this. But if you ask me, the mantlet itself does look rather good. And not that I'm complaining. It does seem like this part was almost an afterthought, and I would have preferred if the kit was designed with it in mind, so that you could just drop it into place, the same way metal guns work. It is still a very nice inclusion though, and I really like it. I install the turret bottom next, and it should sit slightly below, or I guess slightly above, the bottom edge of the turret. Simple enough. Next I add the hatch part to the commander's cupola. You could model this open if you choose, but that's not the Herbert Erpaderp way, so I've glued mine shut. Then I add this little thing here. I'm pretty sure this is a periscope. Whatever it is, it's tiny, but not too difficult to install. Behind the hatch's hinge, I add this photo etch part. It's a cover for that particular vision device. It was pretty simple to place. Unfortunately though, I dropped this assembly and the photo etch part vanished. I was not pleased that the carpet monster got fed, but we can't let that stop us. There's more photo etch to add. Hooray. This little round panel. I assume this is where something has been removed and plated over. There's a little raised bit toward the front of the turret that helps guide this into place. I then add this upper part of the cupola. It goes over the top of the vision devices, and that periscope or whatever it is should fit under the raised part to the right. Now, a tiny machine gun. This is for a tiny commander. I glue the ammo box onto the side of the gun and, unsurprisingly, its size makes it a bit fiddly. While that's off to the side bonding, I install the commander's cupola in the appropriate location. The commander's cupola on the Centurion could rotate, but this part is keyed, so unless you want to remove that keying, it can only be positioned in one way, and for me, that's fine. The mount for the machine gun is a piece of photo etch, which wasn't too difficult bending wise, and once it's in position, I very carefully attach the gun. It did seem like the ammo box on the gun might impede the mount. I'm not quite sure if the instructions were telling me to put the mount on before the ammo box or not, but either way, the gun is in place. When the tiny commander shows up, he can start blasting. Forward of the cupola, I add this, which I assume is a vision device for the gunner. It seems to have a little windshield wiper on it. A luxurious feature indeed. I then add this thing, which I believe is a sighting vane for the commander. Definitely be careful of the machine gun when installing this. On the left front of the turret, I add another vision device, presumably for the loader. Even he needs to look around. A bit further back, I add this antenna. I then install the two sections of the loader's hatch. If you want to make it a bit more complicated for yourself, you can shave off a couple of little plastic nubbins on the hatch and replace them with photo etch parts. I believe they're brackets for a padlock or something. I did consider adding them, but clearly I've decided not to. Some of you might be surprised or even upset by that, but you shouldn't be. There's a lifting bracket on either side of the turret at the front. These are, yet again, some very small pieces, so they would be easy to lose. I follow that by assembling the smoke launchers. Beyond the fiddliness inherent to their small size, they're not too hard to put together. There are 3 sets of 2 launchers that sit at different angles for a nice spread of smoke. I set them aside to bond, and assemble the stowage bins for the turret. There are 3 of these, and they're all very simple to make. All you need to do is glue the bottom part into place. Then, why not glue those onto the sides of the turret? They've all got little nubbins that hold them slightly off the side of the turret, which does mean there's less surface area to bond, but there is enough and they should stay on. There's a fire extinguisher on the rear of the stowage boxes on either side, and there's a fairly obvious recess into which these should be glued. I then add the mounting brackets to the backs of the smoke launchers. There are photo etch mounts you could use. They do require some annoying bending though, including curves, so I used the plastic parts. Obviously the plastic parts are a bit thicker than the photo etch, but I'm fine with this if it means I don't have to have a frustrating experience trying to bend the photo etch, especially without a jig. Bends like that really should include a jig. Next, I install 2 machine gun barrels. I'm assuming that one of these is for ranging the main gun, and the other is the regular coaxial machine gun. The instructions do say to put both of these here, so I'm pretty sure I'm not making a mistake by adding a spare barrel or something. The barrels aren't too difficult to get into place, and they look really good. The slide moulding was a great design choice here. On the right side of the turret I glue this antenna. You are supposed to drill a hole here, but there's no guide for where to drill, so instead I simply removed the mounting pin and glued the part on. I would be eyeballing the position anyway, so this was a bit easier. I then add the smoke launchers. There are little guides on the sides of the turret that show where each connection point is. The thick brackets don't look the best, but they're good enough. I understand that the smoke launchers were sometimes removed from Australian Centurions because they'd get caught on stuff in the jungle, so maybe I'll remove them later. I'm not sure yet. They look fine for my purposes anyway. Here's some photo etch I did choose to add. This is a little bracket for a jerry can. It comes with a jig, which is kind of redundant because the part has bending lines etched into it, so it's not too hard to get into roughly the right shape. Once I got that together, I stick the jerry can in. It dropped right into place when I test fitted, and for some reason it was fiddly when I'd added glue and was filming. There's a little strappy bit that goes across the front of this, and that was also fairly easy to bend. And I think I've got it in the right position. If I was to push it back any further, the part would protrude behind the jerry can and make it difficult to attach to the turret. There are also some microscopic photo etch handles for this assembly, but I decided to omit them. Next, I put this cable reel together. There's nothing too difficult here, though it does have a lot of play to it, so make sure it's not all wibbly wobbly. I then add the jerry can in its little rack. This must be a special jerry can, much more special than those on the engine deck. Obviously it does look a bit messy, especially the photo etch, but it's on, and it will be inside of the stowage basket, so it should be a little bit less obvious then. I add the cable roll. There's a very small shallow mounting hole for it, and you'll have to eyeball and nudge it to make sure it's on as straight as you can get it. Next, we have this bar, which has the mounting for the searchlight on one end. This didn't seem compatible with the 3D printed mantlet, which is kind of annoying. I mean, it's not like the searchlight was only on tanks that didn't have the canvas cover. I looked at some reference pictures and decided what I would do is cut the part down and glue it on. This kind of reinforces my thought that the 3D printed mantlet was an afterthought. Oh well, I had a mount for the searchlight, and at the time, that's what mattered. Bending the photo etch for this rack full of ammo boxes was unpleasant, and the result looks kind of bad. Also, I forgot to video it. It's clearly bent on one side, but I do kind of like that. It's not hard to imagine the real thing could be bent like that by dropping something heavy on it. There were meant to be some very small photo etch handles on that larger box there, but I chose to try and retain what little sanity I had left. I then glue that assembly into what I think is the correct place. There's nothing to guide it, so I just eyeballed it. It wasn't only photo etch that was tedious and fiddly. The stowage basket for the turret rear was just about as frustrating to deal with as any photo etch bit. There's nothing to guide or hold any of these parts together, you just have to stick them together in the right places. It does seem like this was relatively quick in the video, and that's because I used the power of editing to cut out most of the 6,000 hours this took. It is nice and fine looking and probably accurately scaled, and it did feel good to actually get it together before my eyeballs exploded, but this is definitely not going to be fun, especially if you don't have steady hands. Thankfully, my hands weren't too shaky that day. Before attaching the basket to the turret, I add a couple of lifting brackets on either side of the turret rear. It was a bit difficult to see how these are meant to go on, but they are on. I assembled the searchlight next, and it started out well and good. I chose the appropriate clear lens part for the plastic front ring part and glued it into place. I wasn't worried about the glue affecting the clear plastic because I was going to paint it anyway. The problem I had was the plastic ring part didn't really seem to fit, and then I dropped it onto the floor and ran over it with my chair. Good choice, Herbert! It was an accident. I did readjust its shape as best I could, but it was never going to be perfect, and it still didn't fit very well. If you saw the live stream, you'd know that I was pretty annoyed with this, and it does look pretty awful. If I knew this was going to happen, I wouldn't have bothered with that mounting on the mantlet. There is a photo etch ring part for the searchlight, but not only did I not want to deal with it, but the clear part is also different if you want to use the photo etch part. I glued the mounting bracket onto the rear, which was pretty easy. There are meant to be a couple of photo etch handles on the back of the light body, and I would have installed them if the light was worth mounting on the front of the turret, but it's not, so I omitted them. I follow this by gluing the stowage basket onto the rear of the hull, which was a bit of an ordeal. Not quite as bad as assembling the thing, but still kind of annoying. It's very delicate, and I was being very careful not to break it. It would have been a bit easier if the turret could have been sat upside down, but that would involve destroying the machine gun and its mounting. Eventually, I got the basket attached, probably somewhere close to where it should be. Then I put the searchlight into its place in the stowage basket. I didn't really want to, because I really like the way Centurions look with the big searchlight up front, but it just looks way too bad to mount there. Very disappointing. At least this way, even though it looks like it might have been roughed up a bit, at least it's not so obvious. When putting it in, I did pull the basket apart a little bit, which was quite aggravating, but I got it all back together in the end. I am considering covering this area with a tarp or something. Moving on, it's time for the gun, and I'm obviously using the nice metal one. We do have to add the, don't know, is this a bore evacuator? It's a pretty tight fit, so I don't know that the glue was absolutely necessary, but I glued it anyway. I then put it in the appropriate place in the mantlet after making the hole a bit bigger. The fit was really tight, and I didn't feel comfortable applying too much pressure, for probably obvious reasons. Eventually the gun is in place, and I make sure it's nice and straight. Then it's time to go back and add some of the bits I left off throughout the build. I left most of these off because I just figured they would get knocked off while adding the other bits, or because I just didn't feel like dealing with photo etch at the time. Both are good reasons to leave things until later, as long as you're sure that other parts aren't going to make them harder to put on later. There was a couple of little brackets of some sort that are meant to go on the front of the hull near the driver's hatch. Just look at how small they are. I did really try to put these on for quite a while, but I just couldn't. Bits of photo etch that are meant to sit on a surface on their thin side are bad, and when they are this small, they're maddening. They should have a little tab that goes into a slot in the plastic. That would be a good design choice. Next, I add these things. I sat this in front of its position, added glue, and then slide it into place. And then I spent a few minutes being shocked that it didn't somehow just fly away. They're not perfect, but none of my photo etch parts are. Something battle damage. On the rear of the turret behind the ammo boxes, I add this pair of brackety things. There is a hole in the center of them that I would imagine makes mounting them easier if there was a corresponding pin, but there isn't. So they're a bit wonky looking, but they're on, for now. I'm kind of expecting these to disappear as soon as I try to prime the model. This comically tall brush guard for the gunner's vision device wasn't too difficult to put on, but it will also be very easy to accidentally remove, say with a paintbrush. The mesh for the stowage basket comes next, and surprisingly, this wasn't the most difficult thing. It would have been a bit easier if I could have sat the turret upside down, but as I mentioned, that would involve destroying the gun, so I didn't do it. If delicate handling wasn't required for this, it would have been really easy. I got this side part on quite nicely. I was expecting problems with that part, but the problems happened with this part. The problem was actually caused by the searchlight. It seems to be ever so slightly too far to the right, but at normal viewing distance it's not so noticeable. I do quite like the way the mesh looks here. It is a little bit rough, especially when you look closely, but it's not too bad. It'll look a lot better when it's painted, with some stowage in it, and probably a tarp over that searchlight. Time for one final annoyance: the towing cables. I do actually like that they look like cables, and they do seem to be suitable for this scale. They're quite hard to bend though, which is pretty annoying. I came to the realization that some very tiny photo etch brackety things are what is intended to hold these cables onto the hull, and these cables are going to have some tension in them, and that's going to pull the photo etch brackets out of place, and that will make Herbert very angry, so I've left them off. In addition to that, the cables are meant to be glued onto the flat ends of the loopy cabley end bits, and there isn't a hole to slot the cables into, which would give them some strength, so the tension in the cable will pull that apart too, which will also be very annoying. Also, one of the cables has frayed when I tried to bend it. The plastic end parts aren't going to work very well with that. So, no towing cables, at least not at this point anyway. Perhaps Big Bad Bazza from Bunbury has stolen them, and everybody is too scared to go and retrieve them. At this point I haven't added the little cable holding brackets, though they should still be there in absence of the cable. Same with the outer plastic part on the holder on the fuel tank. I haven't totally decided against the cables yet really, and at some point I might try and find something better than the included cables. The thing is, by this time, I was just kind of sick of frustrating tiny parts that refuse to cooperate. It's a hobby and it should be fun, not a source of aggravation. Anyway, the tank is completed enough, and rather than having a video sit there almost done and waiting for something that I might not ever do, this is the build video we get. Address any complaints to the void. So, that's the Centurion 5.1 72nd scale Deluxe Edition kit from Vespid Models, completed-ish. I'm pretty happy with how it looks, even though I know it's missing some bits, and some parts are a bit mangled by my ham-fisted modelling skills, and I'm disappointed that the searchlight is in the stowed position, but I do love me some Centurions, and it does look pretty good. I would say that it looks better at arm's length rather than up super close, which, fortunately for me, is how I build and paint pretty much everything I do. The build process was mostly fun and enjoyable. Sure, I complained about the photo etch quite a lot, but it's not like I didn't know there would be photo etch and fiddly bits. And you are allowed to complain about things, even if you enjoy the thing overall. Perhaps my mistake was to build this mostly concurrently with another model that also had some quite fiddly and annoying bits. That is a me problem though, it's not the kit's fault at all. I was just really excited about another Vespid kit, and a Centurion at that. I'm sure you understand. There were points in this build where I was questioning my sanity a little bit, and also thinking maybe I shouldn't order the Tiger and Hetzer that Vespid have coming soon. But I know I'm going to. Hopefully the photo etch in those kits is a little bit less frustrating to deal with. I might be waffling a bit now.
You've been waffling for the last 30 years!
Anyway, I'm really happy to have another Centurion in my collection. Maybe one of these days I'll build a non-Australian Centurion. If you're looking for a challenge that will take quite a bit of time, I would certainly recommend this kit. Obviously I wouldn't suggest it for a beginner, but if you have the patience for photo etch and steadier hands than myself, this is a good one. It's got a lot of really nice detail, and the parts are mostly well made. I did have to kajigger a couple of things like the drive sprockets, but for the most part everything goes together without a problem. Though user-generated problems could be an issue. Just don't make any mistakes. Easy. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section below. If you want to watch me build kits like this one live, and possibly descend even further into madness, check out my Twitch channel, where I stream pretty much all of the builds you see on this channel. Subscribe if you want, support on Patreon or Ko-fi if you're able, and check out the links in the description. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.